We're going to talk about chapters 2 and 3, and we're going to look at. Hang on, I'm on the wrong bit here. What we did last time, we've got a very, very loose and free and easy script, and because there's only limited people here, just butt in if there's bits that you want to join in with or you want to ask about. You can put it in the chat or just interrupt us, and it's fine, because I think, some of you will have read it, some of you haven't read it, and I could just waffle on all day anyway, but I think it would be...
I know, that's my job, to try and control that.
It was lovely listening back to the recording last time. It was great.
So, just interrupt us, or if there's, like I said, if there's particular bits that you want to know about and we don't seem to be covering it, then just ask us. So we're going to look at chapters 2 and 3, and we're going to look at getting to the nuts and bolts of relational inclusion.
I was just thinking that about 2 hours ago, I sat down, even though I prepped over the weekend, I sat down and reread those 2 chapters again. And what did I text to you? I said, God, the book's good. It just read, and I know that sounds a bit big-headed, but it just reminded me all of the anecdotes and I thought, oh my God, I forgot I told people about that. So hopefully they'll come up. So in chapter 1, it was really about the why. But these chapters really looking at how we go about using relational inclusion. And we're going to start with the 5 guiding principles and talk deeply about the role of relationships. It's not, we said it last time and we'll say it again many times. This isn't the kind of, an off the shelf, this is what you do. Every school's different. Every head teacher implementing things like this will do it in a different way. So it's not just a strategy, but it's got to be the heart of school culture. And that's where we're coming from. So starting off with the guiding principles, Anthony, that was a piece of work that you did very early on. So where did it come from for you?
So I did the MPQEL. I'm not about doing qualifications and badges like that. I really don't like things like that. But I'd just become an executive head, and it was a course about being an executive head, and I'd moved from mainstream to Peru, so I thought it might be useful. And some of it actually was useful, but one of the talks was by Frank Norris, who used to be the CEO of the Co-op Academies. And he talked about having guiding principles, and it was more about the co-op than it was about schools and things like that. And I thought that's actually quite a good idea, because, when you've got a good idea, you can operate anything in your school. But if you want to operate it more widely, it's a bit like, what does it mean? What does it stand for? And like Alan was saying, if we're not saying it's dead prescriptive, this, and you have to start on page 1 and work your way through, then if we're going to live with looseness, there's got to be something that kind of binds it together. There's got to be something that you can, I always say, you've got to be able to hang your washing on something. So that was then, I thought, well, guiding principles then does sound like a good idea, because there's something underlying it, and there's something that everybody can grip onto. And actually, as we've set up our trust now, we're saying as a trust, these are our guiding principles. We aren't saying the schools have to adhere to them, as in they don't have to put them on their walls, as long as they buy into the values behind them. And I think that's kind of really key, and it's important then, because you've got some sort of non-negotiables that really says this is what it is, and that's how it works.
And I think one of the things that when we've been setting up this multi-academy trust, one of the conversations that we keep having is, does that sound like us? Is this just something that could be written by anybody, or is it, specific to what we do? So with the guiding principles, then the first one, is it a quote that you've got it from? Where did it come from? So that's, if a child could do better, they would. Where did that come from?
And I knew I'd do this, so I've left the book upstairs and I can't remember what it was called. But all the guiding principles were stolen from somewhere, and I think we always say, don't we, the best ideas are always someone else's. And I will, at some point when you're talking, Alan, I'll nip upstairs and have a look. It's something like believing, and it was just a line that really resonated, which was that, if kids could do better, then they would. And it comes from, for me, when I took on the proof, so many head teachers rang me up and said, these children are choosing to do this. They have, as if, and they were talking about 4, 5, and 6 year olds as if they'd come into school with the intention of ruining an adult's day or smashing up a classroom or core. And I just thought, it's abhorrent, that, isn't it? There is no child that comes in and thinks, I'm going to target that member of staff and I'm going to ruin their day. And I thought it was really interesting that then head teachers would echo that to me and go, it's chosen. It became a real pet hate of mine when they said it's chosen behaviour. And I have to confess as well, it should really be, if a child or parent could do better, than they would. And where I'm confessing is, for a long time I spent my career almost blaming the families. So if the child couldn't behave, I'd bring the parents in and tell the child off in front of the parents, in that kind of intention, in the old system of shaming the families, really, saying, look, why can't you make your child behave better? And what we do know is that everybody's doing the best they can. And that should be the starting point. And if that's not, if something's not working, then our job, surely as school leaders and educators, is to work together with the families and go, how do we put this right together? Not how do we lay the blame at somebody's door. Do you want to talk a bit? I'll go and find the name of that book.
Yeah, I can do. Looking then on page 34, and this was the first part. This was what made me kind of send the text to Anthony. Because there's the bit where I can think of many situations in my own life where I've not behaved well, and we'll get to those in a second, such as shouting abuse at fellow motorists who's done something not to my liking, or I've not felt very safe, and I have later regretted my actions and words. I can honestly say, even though I've been appalled by my reactions, I've never once thought about what I was going to do and then choose to behave badly. So if that works for me as an adult, and I don't know about yourselves, I'm sure we all don't behave badly, but stick me, I'm one of the calmest people that I know, but stick me in a car, and it's learned behaviour from my dad, but I am completely transformed into some vile, horrible person. And the same used to apply to, so this is what, I don't know why I thought of this when I was reading it, but I had a good giggle to myself. So I'm going to admit it. I used to have a thing about the local Asda, and they used to kind of like, I don't know, there were other things going on in my life, shall we say, and I just took it out on Asda. And there was one particular time when I went in and I went up to the desk to ask somebody something, and they said, oh, I'll just go and find out, and then disappeared, never came back again. And when you're kind of standing there and kind of your foot's tapping, you're getting more and more annoyed. Well, the stupid thing was that they had a little microphone with a button on it right in front of me. So I explained to everybody what I was annoyed about at the time. And I look back on it now and it's just cringing. But we shouldn't have shame. It was all meant in the best possible taste. So that really is around the bit about kind of a child could do better, they would.
I've got a bit more. I'm gonna jump in again. Is that all right?
Yeah.
So first of all, the book is called Belonging, and it's by Dan Hughes and a few other people. So hang on, I'll just see if I can find their name. Sian Phillips and Denny Mellim, and it is an interesting read, that, and that's where I got it from. But I'm going to do a bit that's not in the book. My favourite bit with the picture, Alan. Because I think
can't work it out.
You can't work it out. I couldn't put this in the book because I don't know where the picture came from. But what I try and demonstrate when we're doing this with schools is, this thing about chosen behaviour. When you understand the nervous system and you understand that if you're living in a hypervigilant state, that your brain starts predicting things that are. So it's what's the word that I'm looking for, Alan? The word that I'm looking for is neuroception. So we all think we're perceptive. It's in the book, this bit. We always think we're perceptive, but actually neuroception is going on. So what's happening is 95% of the time your brain is predicting before you even think about it what's going to happen. And 5% of the time you get it wrong. And there's an anecdote in the book, but if you're living with trauma and you meet a member of staff who have like a neutral resting face or even an angry resting face, then that will generate a response. And and I think this is in the book, I've had so many times where staff have rung me up and gone, just out of nowhere, this kid's flipped a desk. And I have to say to them, have you looked in the mirror? You know, because they have an angry resting bitch face, and they just don't know it, and they don't understand that that provokes a response in a child that's hypervigilant. And I just think it's so key. And then so I use this image to demonstrate it, and it's going to cause me chaos now. I use this image to demonstrate with staff, but I thought I'd show you it because if I can show you it, it's a good one to show that it can happen to anybody at any time. So let me just see if I can share my screen. Up there, can you see that picture?
Yeah.
And so, you know, what can you see? And anybody want to? Don't spoil it if you can actually see. What does it look like? Anybody going to volunteer?
I see a figure of what could be perceived as some traditional Jesus-like
Yes,
character.
thank you for not. That's it. When I did it with a religious school, he said it was Rasputin, so I don't know what it says of him. But no, I agree. It does look like it's Jesus, and it isn't. And as far as I know, it's not a trick photo. So can anybody see what it really is? You're not allowed, Alan. You can never see it anyway.
I can now.
Okay.
First time.
So can anybody? Can you see what's really there? I've got like a cleaner version. Hang on. It lets me. So can you see, like, it's a baby sitting on dad's knee, and it's his hat. I mean, you can still, if you squint a bit, you can still see Jesus, but I'll take it back to see if you can see it now. And I just think it's a really useful, I'll stop sharing now, but I just think it's a really useful way of demonstrating, hang on, to staff that you can't always trust your eyes. You know, your brain does make judgments. And that's why it's so important. And we've got so many children that are coming in carrying so much baggage and so much going on that we really start to understand what they might be reacting and responding to. Okay, is that over to you now,
Alan? No.
We're going off script now.
We're going to, no, that doesn't surprise me. No, we're going to look at the staff and children check-ins. Or am I ahead of myself now?
Let me have a look.
As we're talking about relationships, moving on to the relationships.
I think you've dropped. Well, yes, that's right. So, well, first of all, what I wanted to talk about. So we talked. The second guiding principle is about relationships, but we'll pick that up because that's chapter 3. However, there are 2 things I wanted to say about relationships. One of them is that what we now do, and it is in the book, is we have a cultural fit document, and I just stole it from somewhere else. But what I wanted was staff to join the school or the trust now to understand what we stand for before they join us, or even to sort of put it out loud and proud. This is what we stand for. And I think it's an interesting thing that, because schools are really difficult places to work in, and it's the best job in the world when that works, and it's the worst job in the world when you get it wrong. And I've lost count of how many schools I've worked in. There was one school and I just didn't like it. You know, it didn't fit me culturally, and I don't know, still not quite sure why. So what we now do, we've got a 1-page document that kind of says, if you come and work for us, this is what we stand for. And then the bottom few bullet points about that are about the relational inclusion side as well. And I think what I don't want to do with that is discriminate against people. So I'm not, if people don't know about relational inclusion and are interested in it, that's brilliant. And, you know, and that tees up some nice interview questions. But I don't want people coming and getting a job in the school and then carrying on because we're not a hang 'em and flog 'em school or trust, and then wondering why it's not working for them. So I think it's quite interesting to set out a document very simply. And it's also a good exercise because you can say, this is what we think the school's like, but then do the lunchtime supervisors agree? And, you know, does it fit with your community? Because if it doesn't, you've got a piece of work to do there as well. So I just thought that's an interesting aside. The other bit about relationships is about checking. And I nicked that from Alan, but I think it's a brilliant way to start the day. So I'll leave that for you to explain what checking is.
Yeah, and that was, so, you know, when we talk about relationships, we obviously talk about staff's relationships with children, and that's key, and we'll go on to that in more detail later. But actually, staff's relationship with each other, and particularly their relationship with themselves, are really, really important. And particularly if you've got, if you're working with children that have got trauma issues and difficult, complex backgrounds, and if you are up here in terms of your own emotions and all wound up, and you've kind of had an argument with the kids or your husband, you've nearly crashed a car on the way to work, and all of these things that happen in people's lives, and then you get to work and you're a bit late and you got stuck in traffic, and a bit like me, where my state was when I went into Asda and she walked off and left me. And if I had then, I mean, look at my behaviours at that point, they were appalling. So if as adults that's where we're at, what I was looking for is ways that we could actually help staff make a break between the home life and work life, and set themselves ready for the day. So I actually I went to visit a secondary school in Leeds called Carr Manor, and a very normal, very big secondary school. And the only thing that was different about it was the start of the day for the staff and for the pupils. And I nicked that idea and then kind of built on it and did it slightly differently. But all the staff, and there must have been about 100, 150 of them, all gathered in the hall, all sat around tables, and each table was led by a member of staff. And they did a daily check-in for staff. So and it's an emotional check-in as well. So what we then did is we broke into smaller teams so that we could literally go around the whole staff. So we had kind of probably about 20 to 30 in a group, all stand round in a circle. And every time I say this, and Anthony was no different, when he first came to see it at one of the schools, said, "Do you really do that?" Yeah, no, we really do that. And we do it every single day, and have been doing it every single day for 2 or 3 years now. So we'd all stand in a circle, do an emotional check-in with all of the staff. And then somebody will ask a lead question. And on one particular day, recently I went in, and it was, what makes you happy? Another one that we've had is, what do you look forward to when you wake up in the morning? And it just gets them to start thinking about their feelings, where they're at, and it takes the brain away from all of those stresses and strains that the day's already thrown at them. After that, we go around in a circle, everybody gives their answer. And after that, somebody then will lead on a mindfulness activity. Now, I've said it loads of times, I'm not a tree hugger. But, just as kind of 1 minute, 2 minute activity, there's kind of, the finger breathing up and down, the square breathing, there's all sorts of different things you can do. And all it is doing is giving your brain a rest. There's nothing you can do about what's happened. You've no idea what's going to happen to you in the day, but you're just living there in the moment, calming your breathing down. And what we're doing is, every day somebody will say, "Oh, I've got a new one we've not done before," but it's just giving them techniques for themselves, but also to pass on to the children. And so that's what we do. Then the staff go off and they repeat the process. So we've modelled it for them with the children. But what it does do, and at first everybody's self-conscious, they don't want to do it, they're very worried about it, they just go, "Yeah, I'm fine, yeah." The longer they do it, and the more there's kind of a trust and the culture changes, people will say, "I've had the morning from hell today, so just watch out." If I shout at you, it's just where I'm at. And actually just admitting that makes them feel better in the first place. So that's kind of where the check-in came from, because we've got to be kinder to ourselves. We're not machines. We're living and breathing humans, and we suffer the same kind of issues and problems and have the same biology as the kids.
And I just come in there. I think the thing that we learnt in the Peru, well, two things that we had was, staff said to me, I don't want to tell everybody how I'm feeling, which I thought was interesting. And another member of staff said, "But you're making me breathe," which I also thought was an interesting response. But I think more seriously, when we recognise that a member of staff is dysregulated, it's that thing of now that we do know that, and especially like in the PRU, where if you have dysregulated staff meeting dysregulated students, it's not surprising that by 10 o'clock the whole thing's on fire, you know. But it's that if we are doing that, are we taking our time to pick up that member of staff? So somebody might come in and say, I don't want to say very much today. I'm not feeling very good. I haven't had a very good night. Are we doing that wraparound care then? And sometimes it just takes a quiet conversation after check-in. But I think you miss a trick if you don't have that follow-up, because it can become superficial. You've got to live and breathe it, and you've got to follow it up with that. And I think that's really important. But I think it's a brilliant thing, and it's grounding, isn't it? You know, if everybody takes 2 minutes to feel the floor and to breathe a little bit, it just sets the day for you. And I think it's been a massive change in where we work. So it's been a really good thing.
It certainly gets people focused for the day, and they do go on and then repeat it with the children. It's like the first 10 minutes of their day has already been organised for them. And it's fascinating. The children really, really respond to it as well. Not straight away, but they do get used to it. And they will say, I've not had a very good night, or, you know, I've been up since this time. And it just gives you a better appreciation of where they're at.
Which links us nicely to one of the other guiding principles, which is about addressing the cause and not the symptom, because it's that same thing. You know, if you take that surface level behaviour, so I always say, you know, you can stop a kid kicking, but then they'll spit. And then you can stop them spitting and they'll swear. So what we've got to do is get to the root cause of what that behaviour is, and what feelings are behind those behaviours. And I've got an anecdote from I don't know where I've stolen this one from, but it was about a little girl in a classroom, and it was an art lesson. At the end of the art lesson, the teacher said, "Put your name on this piece of paper." Did I tell you this last time? I'm not repeating myself, am I? No. So the teacher said, put your name on the piece of paper. She didn't put a name on the drawing she'd done and handed her work in. And then the teacher said, oh, Katie, you've not put your name on the piece of paper. I'll do it for you. And wrote the girl's name on the piece of paper. At which point this child dysregulated spectacularly, smashed the classroom up. You know, you couldn't get near her. Wild, you know, absolutely wild. Now, luckily, the school was in tune with these kind of behaviours, so they spoke to social worker, and what had happened was the girl had been taken into care because her home life was very, very volatile, and both her parents were unsafe, and she, being primary school, kind of thought if she wrote her name on a piece of paper, her parents would be able to find her. And so she was then terrified that because this teacher had written her, but you know, it's true. There are hundreds of stories like that where big behaviours, apparently big behaviours from nowhere. It's all about getting to the cause of what's actually going on. Because once you hear that story, your response is very, very different, isn't it? And I think that's so important.
And then we go on to, we accept all emotions, but not all behaviours. And, you know, this is kind of where I came into this approach, really. I went on a training course with Emotion Coach in the UK. I don't know whether anybody's ever come across them. Absolutely transformed my thinking. It really did. And it's only part of the jigsaw, but it's a very valuable bit. And it was, it's kind of built on the work of John Gottman, and there's 3 people who lead that and still involved with them today. And it's basically saying, you know, there's kind of a bit of a script that goes with it, but every time you go into a situation, it's like, it's okay to be angry, that's all right. It's not okay to kick somebody because you're angry, you know. So it's acceptable to whatever your emotion, whatever you're feeling, and you try to help the child understand what it is they're feeling, because they're not always able to articulate their emotions as well. So, but say, no, the emotion's fine. Don't worry about that. You know, but the behaviours we need to think about, and we need to you know, to set a limit on those kind of behaviours, repair the harm afterwards. But the first part of it is really about helping children to understand their emotions, and that's where it links back to the check-in as well, because you you know, as part of the check-in, they'll do all sorts of things. They'll look at different emojis with different expressions on. They'll talk about. So if they're not very verbal, they might just pick a picture that suits how they're feeling at that particular moment. And then, you know, we'll gradually ask them why. Sometimes if they pick a, you know, really angry looking face, and you know, they want to go out, they can go to another area and sit and talk with somebody. So we've got, you know, an emotionally available adult at that particular time. So it's about assessing where the child's at. But we absolutely, and a lot of people think that when you're doing this, oh, it's all right if you're doing it with primary kids. Oh, it's okay if you're just doing it with a few special kids. No, this is what is right for everybody. So
well, I'll jump in. You know, there's research. They're saying, aren't they, that primary school children are starting to self-harm now, which is over the last couple of years, which is appalling. But the research shows that if we teach the children to name and label their emotions, it reduces, in fact, it nullifies that kind of thing. So I think it's so important. You know, I really push for zones of regulation and stuff like that. But again, there's a kind of warning with that, because I've been into a few schools and they said, well, we've done zones of regulation, it hasn't worked. Or I've even seen a school where there was a zones of regulation board on the wall where all the kids' names were by the emotion. And so it's really important that we invest time to get what that actually means, and respect. And the other thing is, you know, I still see those images, and they do it from inside out, where anger is this big fiery red, and it's that thing of all emotions are okay. You know, there isn't one that's better or worse than the other. As Alan says, it's not okay to go and kick somebody, but it's perfectly fine to be angry. You know, we've got this terrible thing in British culture about that stiff upper lip, you know, and I've got a colleague and his daughter died. No, his son died, sorry. And one of his friends was saying to him, well, you know, you'll be okay. And he was like, excuse my language, he was like, I'm never going to be fucking okay. And that's okay. You know, what's not okay is to bury that emotion and pretend about it. So I just think doing that work with emotions, I've got another quote, you know, our repertoire of words for calling people names is larger than our vocabulary of words to describe our emotional state. And isn't that a funny thing? You know, and then I was reading something last night. I was messaging Alan this. I put it on LinkedIn for those of you that picked it up. But you know, I was reading something about the brain, and what's interesting is the right hemisphere is the part of your brain that feels emotion, but the left hemisphere is the part of your brain that labels it. So there's even a kind of, you've got to get it from one part of your brain to the other before you even can label it. So we've got to support you know, the sooner we build those neural networks and those synapses, the sooner that we can support those children. But you can understand why they can start firing. Sorry, Karen, go for it.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to share about the fact that you just talked about anger, and I've got student mental health nurses that come on placement, and the last ones we had, they've been running projects, and it was actually around anger. And I asked them to actually just go through our system at the time, not see the children that we know have had a fight recently, but actually just randomly pick some names from our, you know, whatever system you've got that's got the children on the registers, and go and find them and talk to them, because there'll be people sat in classrooms who are internalized all their anger, and no one's ever asked them, you know, what do you do when you feel angry? Is it acceptable in your house? What messages have you had from home about anger? Then they spoke to parents at parents' evening. What do you say to your children around anger? How do you support them if they're angry? So you're right. It just, you know, it's something that I don't think everybody finds easy to talk about, or like you say, okay in a conversation, because the behaviours sometimes is what the focus is rather than the emotion that's led to that behaviour.
And that unfortunately leads us down this sort of punitive behaviour pathway, you know, this tariff-led system. If you do this, then this. If you do that, then that. And schools get tied up in knots about that, where, you know, if we go back to that girl in the classroom who smashed up the classroom, okay, it's not all right to smash up the classroom, but are we going to punish her? Because, you know, I guess that leads us on to the next, the final guiding principle, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say something on the tariffs bit, because again, it was something I noticed in the book, that if you have a tariff system, you imagine they're kind of very rigid and, you know, everybody understands it. But they're so open to interpretation. And I describe a situation of a tariff system that I was involved in setting up, where, you know, all behaviours, it was a kind of consequence system, consequence, you know, C1, C2, C3, C4, and you used to record them and this and the other. And, you know, the staff were all involved in deciding what the different behaviours were. And we had this one that people decided was a level 4, it was the worst it could possibly be, and it was defiance. And I now just cringe when anybody says, but he was defiant. Because what happened in the school was that it became really polarized, because if you got a C4, it meant that somebody higher up the kind of behavior chain was going to deal with it. So if a child went into the classroom, sat down, put the hood up, and, you know, put the head on the desk and ignored the member of staff, and the member of staff said, take that coat off, then they were deemed to be defiant, and therefore it was right to the top of the behaviour ladder, and it demanded immediate response from a senior member of staff. And it was like, no, at level 2, there's failure to take your outdoor clothing off, you know. Yeah, but I told him to do that and he wouldn't do it. And it really said a lot about some of the staff and how they felt, and, you know, that they didn't want to be dealing with that, and how they took things very personally. So that's also one of the reasons why I think a kind of tariff system is really dangerous in many ways. You know, because I'd often be having conversations with them and say, well, you know, look at the other C4 behaviours. Do you think not taking your coat off is equivalent to fighting with somebody or being, you know, racist or something like that? And some of the staff would say, yes, they're being defiant and they should always do as I say. And it's like, oh, okay. That's all right then. So yeah, so sorry, I just went on a bit there.
No, but it's one of the schools I worked in that they introduced a defeat defiance room, and I just thought, what does? So sit down, shut up, do as I say, or we will defeat. You know, and I do understand. I've been in that position, and I understand where it comes from. But it's such a culture shift, you know. And why are we this sit down, shut up brigade? It doesn't work.
Yeah. So the final principle is a culture of compassion and repair. And it's and actually, you know, when somebody works this one out, please let me know, because I've been working with Dr. Luke Roberts now for probably about 6 years on various aspects of this, and it is so difficult. It's just a minefield. We've tried lots of different things, and we definitely, I mean, what we do is really good, but I still think there's a lot more to work to be done around this. So basically, you know, one of the, for want of a better word, the consequences is that there will be some kind of repairing of the relationship. It has to happen, and you will get teachers who say, "Oh no, it's all forgotten about. That's about. I'm okay." And it's like, no, the child needs to go through this, you know. And I'm sure that you've all had situations where you try and get the staff in and the child into a room together, and then the member of staff takes that as an opportunity to tell the child off in front of you, so they can tell them everything they've done wrong. And it's like, no, that's not what we're here for. So I've tried lots of different methods and had lots of different failures with it, but I think we've got a really good system now. But it does take some development, and there are lots of different things out there, but you have to be in a good place to do it.
I think, you know, one of the issues is, and lots of the children I've worked with, they're not modelled how to repair at home for whatever reason. You know, it might just be that parents aren't there. Something goes wrong, they get told off, parents are out, or it might be worse than that. But they carry with them this thing that they're bad or they've done wrong, and that they're not being forgiven for that. You know, so it's so important for us to model to children. You know, all of us make mistakes, all of us get it wrong, and what's important about that is how you put that right together. And I just think you can't, like, I've had so many staff go, so I don't need to repair this. And you need to model to the children that we make mistakes. And yeah, sometimes that's really hard to own up to it. You know, it's really tricky, but it's okay, you know, and it will be okay, and we can move forwards with it. And I think that that's going to make a massive difference to young people. And the other thing that's a bugbear of mine is what was born of restorative practice, which is similar to what might happen with trauma informed practice, is it became a series of questions on a lanyard. So, and I've seen, right, you've got to have we're not going to have detentions, we're going to have restorative conversations. So you had a line of kids lining up outside what was the detention room, and they go and sit with the teacher, and it's 3:30 and it's sunny like it is today, and the teacher sits down and goes through this list of questions, sends them out, brings that's not what repair is. And sorry, last thing for me, and then is I think it's not. I think people feel like there's this panic to get it done there and then, and I don't think that's necessarily the case. Sometimes it doesn't have to be the same. If you leave it too long, obviously it's not going to work. But sometimes, you know what it's like for you. If you're really annoyed about something, there's no point in trying to have a restorative conversation with that person. Sometimes you need to leave it an hour. Sometimes you need to leave it till the next day. But I think it is important, if you leave it till the next day, it's done quite quickly so that the child isn't carrying that with them. Because otherwise, if they're worried about maths and maths is period 3, then there might be a bit dysregulated periods 1 and 2, and it builds up to that. So it's just managing that and watching it. Sorry, Alan, I think you're going to...
Well, all I was just going to say is that because I didn't give a lot of detail about how we did it, and that's for a very good reason, because I think people really ought to have a look around, see what's out there, but absolutely not go down that, kind of restorative justice kind of few sentences and things. One of the things that we do that is really, really powerful at the moment is we start by saying, how did you feel beforehand? What were you feeling? What were your thoughts before this happened? Then they can talk about what led up to it, and then they can start to consider that it probably had nothing to do with the person that they fell out with. It was probably more to do with themselves. And then we talk about, so how did you feel during this? How do you feel about it now? So it really would just bring it back on itself in terms of feelings. So Sarah, you've got a question.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. I'd just be really interested to hear your thoughts about managing the child who has been at the receiving end of a thrown chair or a kicked, has been kicked, or the parent of that child, when we're giving space absolutely for the child with the emotions to decompress and then come back to them at a later date. But you've got a child who is hurt and their parent is raging and they're at your door and you've got to give, like, what are you going to do? You're letting this bad behavior. So just interested to hear your thoughts on that.
No, that's a really, really good question, because that's one of those things, like everything, I guess, there's no instant answers to it, because it takes time to develop. So in terms of the work that we've done around restorative practices, we've also trained some of the kids, and we've done work with all of the kids as to what it's about, the kind of questions that might get asked. So it's part of something much bigger. What we didn't do is train up a few staff and then say, right, we're doing it today. So in you come, and then, it was first introduced to the kids. How did you feel beforehand? So there was a lot of build up to that. Less so with the parents, and I think that was, I would have done, but the parents in schools that I was working at the time were very, very hard to get involved. So, like I said, it's part of a journey towards more restorative approaches. In terms of the child who had been harmed, one is there's a different language there. The child who's been harmed, I tried really hard. I was going to say never, but that's not true. Call them a victim. That harm has been done, and we need to repair that harm. And actually, they often bring an awful lot of emotion into it as well, and it's important in these conversations, because we don't just bring two people into a classroom, with an adult and say, now we're going to sort this out. Right, if you can't get on, then stay apart. Off you go. We invest some time in it. And that time is really valuable. So by going through and listening to what the children are telling you about how they felt beforehand, how they felt, and we've had children who've said, look, I just dead angry today. If it wasn't, it's nothing about him. It's just that, my brother got arrested by the police at 1 o'clock in the morning, and they didn't leave until 6 o'clock in the morning, and I've had no sleep. And the child goes, "Are you all right?" We've had things like that. So if it's part of a general culture of talking about emotions, I think that's how you do it. I would have liked to include more with the parents, because yes, you have the parents.
Well,
say,
I'll jump in here.
Okay.
Right.
Well, let me just add one thing, which was the bit about, the number of times I've sat in a room and said, well, I don't care. I told them to hit them back. If somebody hits you, hit them back. Hit them harder. Yeah, right, okay. So, now
but I'll just backtrack a bit. So one of the things that the schools Alan used to do is it's like a picture map of what led up to that event. And they're really quite powerful, because what the member of staff is trained to do is it's a bit like I was saying, how do you feel before? But the kids are kind of guided to draw this. And what it leads to then is a kind of a natural, oh, crikey, I've made this kid feel like this, which leads to a natural kind of repair process. Because then, if appropriate, they can share that drawing with that kid, and the school's used to that culture. That isn't where I was going. Just like, it's a useful thing, and if people are interested in that, I'm sure we can get you some more detail on it. But one of my head teachers, we were talking about this. There's two things I want to say about parents. One is, you've got to have the bravery as a head teacher, and I've never, it's not a parent's job to know what the consequences are. And I never, whatever's happened, I would not say to a parent, and because of this, we're going to do this, this, and this. Your child is at my school. You have to trust that our policies and practices pick up this, and we will deal with it. But just like if something had happened with your child, you wouldn't want me sharing what had happened to your child because of X, Y, and Z. We've got some confidentiality here. And then one of my heads said something to me only last week, and I thought that was absolutely brilliant. She said, you chose to, because we set up our schools in this way, you've chosen to bring your child to our school because this is how we manage these situations. Now, because your child is more settled now, or, because lots of children, they would move from one school to another and they couldn't manage, and they've chosen our school and it comes back to that cultural fit document as well. This is the kind of school we are, and you chose that. And yes, this might be difficult at the moment, but this is the culture that we thrive and survive in. And the reason we're not shouting at your child and punishing your child is the same reason that we've got a different approach. It doesn't mean there won't be any consequences, and it doesn't mean there won't be repair, but we do not have that tariff, hard-nosed, punitive behaviour system. And here's all if they're ready for it, here's all the science behind it. But I think it's being brave enough to hold that line. Of course, they're angry, and you do all of that. I'd be angry too, and I understand all of that, but and unpick it and give them that time. So I think that's kind of key.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's fascinating though. The whole bit around repairing the harm is a really kind of neglected area, I think.
I think
I look back on the kind of the old restorative justice that was doing the rounds about 15, 20 years ago. And it's one of those to just hang my head in shame and think it's done more damage than anything. But, you live and learn. Sorry.
But no, I think as well, I might have mentioned this last time, we are, the next wave of all this relational inclusion package is relational inclusion parenting. And what I didn't want to do, my therapist that I work with keeps saying to me, we've got to do this with the parents, we've got to bring the parents in. And I was just adamant that until we get it right in the schools, I can't do that, because otherwise, the parent will go, well, Karen said this, but Sarah said that, and they're playing the teachers off against each other. But we're putting a working party together with our trust, because I do believe that we can work with parents in the same way that we've worked with staff and children to say this is what it means, and this is how, I've started using some of this stuff at home as well. And I still get it wrong, and I'm still a grumpy dad sometimes. But it's those conversations afterwards. It's being brave enough to go, do you know what? I snapped at you then, and I shouldn't have done that. I was angry, and that's okay, but I shouldn't have taken it out on you. And if we can get a small parent group together and model it with them and work. So it isn't, again, it's not bringing parents in and telling them how to parent, and it's not bringing parents in and bollocking them. It's going, look, this is what we've learned and we can share that with you, and then you get that true therapeutic community going, don't you? You know, and that's the aim of all of this.
So we're going to go on to look at chapter 3.
But I was just going to say, before we go to chapter 3, is there anything about the guiding principles, or actually I'll say one more thing about them and then it will give you 5 minutes if there's anything you want to ask about them. But one exercise that we've done when we've trained schools on this is, first of all, with the leadership team and then with the whole staff, is do a full sort of hour or two inset where we just say, look, here are the 5 guiding principles. And we recognise that as a staff body, some of them you will naturally assimilate with, and some of them you'll like, but you won't know how to make them work. And some of them will grate with you. And then in that proper therapeutic way, a totally open-ended discussion with the staff where very much it's that, I always want to say, that annoying counselling way where we don't really give them, we let them come to us with what it is they want to say and then explore those feelings so that everybody understands what sits behind. Because once you've got that true understanding, it is very hard to argue with any of them, but you've got to give people the chance to explore that in an open domain so that they can get all of those feelings out about, but what if this, and if you're not punishing them, what about that? And I guess the discussion about parents as well. So I think that's just a really useful exercise or inset activity.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm just conscious of time as well. We're going to go on to relationships. And if I can find my...
yeah, and I mean, you know, relationships are everything, as we've said. You know, the emotions behind the relationship. If we don't get you, whether you work with children, whether you work with adults, whether you work with animals, if you don't get those relationships right, it just doesn't work. So...
yeah, so one of the tools that you use an awful lot is and talk about with the staff is window of tolerance.
Yeah, well, I'm sorry, have I jumped? I'll backtrack a bit. I'm just going to say, before even window of tolerance, I think it's the know thyself bit that's the most important bit, and I think it's the biggest miss that we have in schools, because I think staff don't know about their own attachment styles, and staff don't know about their own stress response, and they don't know about their own ACEs. And if you don't do some, and I think the other thing is, it doesn't mean that a certain attachment style doesn't mean you can't work in schools or with children. But if you're not aware of your attachment style, so for example, anxious attachment is overrepresented in schools. So teachers, compared to national, I think nationally 15% of the population are anxious avoidant, and in schools it's about 30%. And if you think about it, there's a logic behind that, because if you're anxious avoidant as a child, so if your parents, you know, it's on-off parenting, isn't it? So for whatever reason you're not getting that thorough full attention from your parents, then where do you get that attention? You get it in school, don't you? So it leads to lots of anxious children wanting to become teachers, and that's brilliant. Then they get into school, they get into the classroom, and you know what it's like as a practitioner. You teach your first lesson and they're eating out your hands, but you've got that honeymoon period, and then at some point, and I suppose where I'm going is, you spend all your time planning this wonderful lesson, and you get to one lesson and those kids take you to pieces. And it doesn't matter whether you're the best teacher in the world or the worst teacher in the world or support member of staff, we've all been there where a class has just taken you to pieces. Now, if you're anxious avoidant, what that does is threatens your inner working model, because your inner working model says, I need the attention from them, and I've put all this work into this class and they've now rejected me. And I see this a lot where you get a member of staff. It's that thing with where Alan referenced before, where you bring them in to do restorative and the teacher takes that opportunity to tell them off in front of you. Because their internal working model's being threatened, you don't have a coping strategy for that. So you become angry and then take it out on the class. And I think what's so important is, if we have a tool that helps baby teach. It doesn't mean an anxious avoidant teacher can't be a teacher. It means you have to know that that's part of what you are, so you've got some strategies to manage it. And I think if we did that, right, even if we did that with people in any stage of the career, but if you definitely did that at the start of somebody's career, you'd massively help their well-being and the well-being of the class. And I just think it's a missed trick that. Should I go on to window of tolerance as well?
Well, I was just looking again, just before we do on that, because again, it was another bit that made me smile today. And that was, who would want to be a teacher? I mean, it's just, I mean, it is the most rewarding job in the world, but it's so mad. I mean, who made this up? I mean, you're put into so many different situations. And the one that I give in the book is that, I'd gone through life, I was successful at school, and went on to university, and then became a teacher, and progressed and all the rest of it. And then suddenly it was like, I've got my own office and I'm a deputy head, and isn't this wonderful? And then the bell would go for break time, and my office was right on the edge of the canteen area. That's needs to be supervised all the time. So I'd come out of my office in my suit, stand at the end. And there was this one child. I didn't teach him. I didn't know him. And nothing about him. But he and I described him as a heat-seeking missile. He just saw me from a distance and was like, I'm having him. And he could press all of the buttons every single time. And it was like, what have I done to deserve this? Anyway, I'll leave you to read that bit. But it essentially what happens is then I find an area by accident where I could connect with him, and within a millisecond he'd gone from being the worst pupil in the world to the nicest pupil in the world. And it was tiny and it was just easy, but it wouldn't have been easy if I had kind of constantly, right, that's it, he's been defined, he needs to go. I had to work on it. I had to be the adult in that situation, and I had to find a way of building that relationship. And it is so important. Sorry, I interrupted. So window of tolerance.
So what? Well, I mean, I think window of tolerance has been another game changer for me, and I think it's that. I think I used to believe in like omens and stuff like that. What I mean by that is, if you wake up in the morning and you're standing the cat sick and your child's wetting themselves, I was like, right, I'm gonna have a bad day today. I thought that's an omen. We just know that it's going to be a bad day. And then as you watch the day go on, you see more and more of these instances. So when I learned about window of tolerance, and I was like, what's really going on is there's been an incident and that's pushed my buttons. But I do have control over that. I can recognise that that's happened. I can speak to a member of staff through check-in, or I can choose to let that dictate how the rest of my day goes. And I just think that it's a tiny, tiny thing, but when that's how your brain works and your nervous system works, it's an absolute game changer. And I don't know if I'm going off piste here, but again, it's one of those things that you can do in schools, because I think for some reason schools are reactive rather than proactive. So we're constantly reacting to situations. But if you think about window of tolerance as a person, and then look at that in a school that's got 500 or 1,000 people in it, some of it we can predict. So if you do like a mapping exercise, we all know Mondays and Fridays are going to be tricky. And we all know when it gets to lunchtime, it's going to be tricky. And we all know the week before half term, it's going to be tricky. Yet what do we do about it? Just carry on, and so my recommendation is, with SLT, with food organisers, with TAs and with kids and with staff, just get them to map a day into, like heat map a day, and then look at how they all fit together. Because then if you know that 10 minutes before lunch is a pressure point for all those groups of people, then manage it differently. Preempt it. And we all know, I mean, in the Prue, it's 2 weeks before half term. But if we know that, because the kids are getting worried because they know that this safety net's not going to be there. But if we know that, let's change how we address that. you know. And similarly, I think it was one of the first adventures Alan and I had, where we were invited into I think this is in the book actually. We were invited in to a school, and the head teacher was asking us about one little boy who she said he just dysregulates every day. And we went for a walk around the school actually. And while we were walking around the school, of all the kids in the school, one little boy clocked us, and he never made eye contact with us, but he kind of circled us in this weird way. So wherever we were, he had us in his sight without ever directly looking at us. And when we got, I mean, Alan's more observant than I am, so when we got into the head's office, he said, "It's not that little boy, is it?" And it was. And we said, "Tell us about this little boy." And she said, "Well, just every morning he comes in and dysregulates." And we said, "Well, tell us a bit more." And it turns out, which is often the way, he was one of 7 children, very, very disruptive home life. But what was key was that 2 of the children were always in care. And I said to the head teacher, I can probably stop you now, because what's happening is he's coming to school and he doesn't want to leave his mum. And so he's dysregulating. And there's 2 reasons why he doesn't want to leave his mum. One is, if she's out of his eyesight, he's no control of what he's going back home to. And 2 is, maybe he won't be going home. Maybe it'll be his turn to go into care. And therefore, wouldn't you fight? Wouldn't you fight for everything you've got for that? And that was a change, you know, and I think it is in the book. It was a changing moment for her. That little boy now does sometimes dysregulate, but it's never more than 5 or 10 minutes. And they've created a different, because we said to her, what are you doing differently? And she said, you know, funnily enough, we did an assembly one morning and they do, what is it? Smell the flower and blow out the candle.
Yeah.
You know, I always get that the wrong way around. I did it right for once. And she said, we did that assembly one morning and he didn't dysregulate that morning. We're like, there you go. It's that breathing thing again. And so but it's such an obvious little thing. But if you do that if you look at those children that are dysregulating and you look at your school or work environment through that lens, it can change the whole culture, you know, in a minute. So, well, not in a minute, obviously, but I think I've gone off pace there a bit, but
in quite a few minutes.
Quite a few minutes, but again, you know, the thing is, and I suppose it's a serious point that what was taking a morning at least twice a week and half a morning the other half of the week suddenly became a 5 or 10 minute thing some of the week, and that's a massive change. And all those other children that are affected by it, because the other thing that heads say to me is, I can't have this kid in the school because it's having an impact on everybody else. But if you look at what we do with those children slightly differently, it'll make a massive difference.
I mean,
right.
The next bit in this chapter is about all the hormones, which Anthony definitely knows more about this than I do. But one thing I will say is that whilst I can't remember all the science, which is a bit silly because I am a scientist, but just not biology. But what it really makes me think about, as I said before, we've all got the same biology. There are chemical reactions going on in the body, which is affecting how people react to certain things. And it's like, once you understand that, and that you can, you know, develop the brain and help them to work in different ways, that's really, really powerful. And just to, I mean, I can't give you much on this one because 2 weeks ago, Anthony, we went to Leeds to a conference. So a lecture from Dr. Andrew Curran, who was absolutely brilliant, great, really recommends the talk. But he gave such an insight into this idea of building the kind of the dopamine and the oxytocin, the happy hormones. And one of the things which I've thought about non-stop since, and I need to find more about it, was he was saying, you know, when you say to a child, "Oh, that's excellent," it's not as effective as saying to a child, "You've worked really hard on that. I'm really impressed." And it was just linking it to hard work rather than something that doesn't mean a lot. And I just, you know, I'm fascinated by that idea, So I just thought I'd throw that one into.
And those, I mean,
might be book number 4. I don't know.
And I'm not going to talk about executive function and all that because it is in the book. But what I did want to reference was another thing that Andrew Curran said, and I can't. Can you remember what his book's called, Alan? I've got it. It's what I'm reading at the moment. I'll find it and I'll share it with you. But the other thing he said was, you know, the issue with punitive discipline measures are that if you are scared like that, you can't learn. And by can't learn, what it means is it's your, I'm going to get this wrong, I think it's your hypothalamus, which is your short-term memory. And then that transfers into your long-term memory. But if you are too scared, it doesn't matter how much, you can't commit that into your memory. So if you're scared of the consequence that's coming or the behaviour system or the member of staff, then it's fine. You'll sit there and you'll be quiet. But if our purpose is to learn and to teach, and to educate, we can't do it because we're working against our own biology. And I just thought that was a fascinating insight. And the other bit I was just looking for on my phone, but I can't find it now. It's something else I posted on what's it called, LinkedIn this week. But it was showing you sort of positive and negative things that trigger dopamine. You know, so things like junk food and stuff like that give you a short-term dopamine hit, but it doesn't support you. Whereas things like exercise and nature give you a long-term dopamine hit. And it's just, again, it's just dead obvious things about how our biology works, and yet how giving kids junk, you know, if you look at some of this, I was laughing with my friend because his lad had come home with his recipe for what he needed to cook for school. And my wife's sort of really quite health conscious and she knows all the foods. I'm a bit more rubbish than about stuff. But she was like, if our kids come home with that recipe, I'm going to have a problem with the school. You know, because if we're meant to be supporting healthy eating and healthy minds, yet they're making junk, then it's just on its head. But it's so interesting that there are 4 chemicals that we absolutely know about that are absolutely proven to help us learn and engage and develop, and we don't invest in them. And I just think that's madness.
Yeah. So the kind of last bit that we put here is we then had a little bit of a section for each of us to kind of give our own journey. And I think, whilst I'm not going to kind of go through mine there, the reason why we did that was because it was that bit about know thyself. You know, in order to do this, we've got to invest a bit of our own emotions and our own kind of backgrounds into this. The other thing is that the more we did this, we kept talking about the same incident. It was like, yeah, but that was a different school. And so when a lot of these stories that are in here, they're half of his story and half of my story, but very, very similar. And time and again that time. So, you know, we can't be the only two. So we're obviously seeing these things all the time. But and
funnily enough, a few people have reached out on LinkedIn and said, you know, that bit that you've written about, that happened to me. And I think it's that thing of, you know, I said to you in the first one, I'm in this to change the world. I think it's time that we make that big change. And I do think there's enough of us that have experienced these same things. And we need to not be quiet about it anymore, don't we? We need to just go, look, let's do this differently. It doesn't work. And there's safety in numbers in that, isn't there?
Absolutely. So the question really is that's kind of the bulk of chapters 2 and 3. So it's really over to yourselves. I mean, we've ended every chapter with a reflection, just to kind of go, you know, just to kind of try and highlight some of the key points. And they were great fun to do, trying to come up with kind of some different questions that make people think. So is there anything that anybody would like to add where, you know, something which has resonated with you or something which has challenged your thinking perhaps, or just a straightforward question for us?
You started with, sorry, I interrupted Sarah's put a hand up.
No, go for it. You go.
You started with the thing for me that's resonated with me and stuck with me is that if the children don't choose to behave that way, I can't remember your wording of it. I haven't got the book in front of me, but that, yeah, they don't choose to do that. And that has really stuck with me because that completely shifts your attitude towards somebody, in my opinion. That's what.
It is powerful, isn't it? Just that bit of just imagining, and I mean, a 15-year-old lad still, but I mean, particularly primary child, sitting there over their Weetabix in the morning thinking, right, who's going to get it today? And I'm going to do this and that. It just doesn't happen.
But it's if a child could do better, they would. That's the phrasing for you.
Thank you very much. That's absolutely what I'm trying to say, but couldn't. But yeah, that is just, yeah. I think I was on that journey, but just hearing that, reading that, and I guess for me, waking up in the morning and thinking that, then it changes your approach to everybody you meet, not just the children, actually, I guess the adults that I see as well.
It applies to everything, doesn't it?
Yeah. And actually, I'm just doing some stuff around school leadership and things, and you're absolutely right. It does apply to adults as well, because I've been a school leader for many, 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 many years, and so many times being really frustrated by something that somebody said or done, and they're not doing it deliberately. However frustrating it is, they too have got, something's gone horribly wrong for them and they're just lashing out. Same biology.
So just to interrupt, and then Sarah, it's over to you, but we said about this book by Andrew Curran, and it's called The Little Book of Big Stuff About the Brain. There's a bit of a warning from me because it's quite old now, quite old, it's about 10 years old or something, but the problem is the first part still talks about the triune brain, and we now know that that's been disproved, and it's the adaptive brain. But other than that, there's some brilliant science in there that, and we've referenced that quite a bit. So, and it was very interesting to listen to.
He did some great drawings, didn't he, with little wiggly worms, showing where all the different things.
Where the brain bit works.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sarah, and then Michelle.
No, not at all. Going back to how it, as you just said about the children not choosing, and knowing how, or seeing how absolutely terrified they are by their own emotional outbursts as well, I think is always really shocking. Not only if they haven't chosen it, but they're not enjoying being in that dysregulated state. And I always think that's just so heartbreaking when you're desperately trying to help that child. I absolutely loved the cultural fit, and having that document that everybody signs up for. I don't know if that's free for taking. I know you've referenced it, and I guess it's maybe if schools have. I've not seen it before written out.
It's from another book based on it.
I saw it. Yeah.
I can't remember what the book is called.
Tom Seton Utley.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is also a really good book.
But it's just so important, because it seems to be, or maybe it's just my experience of it, that you get some teachers who really buy into supporting children this way with their emotions, but it's hard to get everybody on board with it, because you've got a whole culture of it. That's so important. And then the other thing I just want to say about the staff attachment theories, I've never considered that or heard that as being as potentially something as part of CPD, or just a discussion how our own dysregulation obviously could impact, but through attachment theory, it's like, oh my gosh, yes, it's so obvious when you said it or I read it. So yeah, thank you again. Lightning thoughts.
Yeah, and I think I would say you've got to be really careful. It's how you address things like that with staff, because sometimes people think that it's becoming a shaming and a blaming session, and also what I've found is you uncover lots of things with staff that we didn't know was there. So it's just doing that in a very safe and gentle setting. And I mean, when we did it with the Peru, we also made sure everybody had access to a counsellor, because what we didn't want to do was be too scared to open up things, but then not be able to support people if we did. So it's just that, make sure you do it properly if you do go down that pathway, but don't be scared to do it either, I would say. Michelle?
Just echoing what Sarah was saying really about linking attachment styles, and you said an awareness of your own attachment style. Where would you signpost people to go? I mean, how do you know about which attachment style you are, and where's that? I was looking at the book.
Yeah, I mean, the, there's just it's another absolute rabbit hole of reading and books, and there's a whole host of. I couldn't give you one particular one. There is a book referenced in there. If you look at the guiding principles on the one on relationships, there's a book there. And I can't. It's an older study, but then I've forgotten what they're called now. The father and mother of attachment theory. What they're called?
Bowlby.
Yeah, Bowlby, and then is it Ainscough?
Ainsworth, yeah, Ainsworth.
You know, that's where I would go, and then and that'll just bounce you to all sorts of other places.
Yeah,
Because there's a myriad, there's a whole host of different. I'm just working with somebody now, and she is meant to be able to work with you, and there's a survey thing that'll tell you what your style is, and there's a million things. I just think play with them all and see which one works best for you. Because the other thing that I've learned is that it's one of these that everybody can be all of them at different points. You know, so I think it's an awareness rather than another. We've got to be careful not to start labeling again. And the other sort of nugget for us all is that police are overly represented in the avoidant attachment style. And I think that what I was reading in that study was that the longer you're in the police, the worse that gets, which isn't surprising again if you consider the environment that they're working in. And it probably, this is my hypothesis, but it probably goes to why lots of police marriages break down, you know, and then police end up with police, because it's such a different, and you've got to basically where I'm going is to deal with what they're dealing with on a daily basis. You've got to start not feeling some of those things or burying those feelings, you know, and that leads to that kind of issue.
So like the bit you said about drawing the lead up to the event, that's really good. And we've often used things working with younger children, even just a clump of Play-Doh or something, just something to mold, something to represent, something, just some way, something sensory that children can express themselves with in mind and then in actions.
The trauma-informed schools really recommend those sand trays, you know,
Yes.
and they are brilliant. That kind of, and I loved it because I like toys, and they were saying, you know, collect all the toys that nobody's playing with in your house anymore and have them in an office somewhere, because it's amazing if you create that safe space how they can tell a story through a sand tray that they're maybe not able to articulate themselves.
Yeah, or just you know, work through that in a filtering way, but maybe not be ready to tell the story, but just to be ready to tell it in their own mind, and maybe nest it, maybe telling it to themselves really quietly, so they're talking it, but they're not ready yet to express. But some really good. I've made some notes as I'm going through. Really good, really useful to just pause and reflect on and talk to people about. Just keep opening up that conversation.
And it's just great for us knowing that there are other people out there trying to do the same thing, because we haven't got all the answers. And really, like we said, the last session, that one of the reasons we're doing this is because we spent a lot of time reading loads of books, looking around, trying to find it. And it all we can really do is help point people in the right direction, really, and give you a few kind of points that we've learned from, and hopefully share, you know, the things that work for you, and life goes on, doesn't it? We can constantly learn about different ways of doing things. So yeah, so thank you very much. Have we got any other questions before we finish? Any other comments?
Which chapters for next time?
Well, I was just looking for a date for next time, because we've got half term in between, and we've got a trust board meeting on Tuesday. So I'm thinking Tuesday the 10th of June is probably the earliest that we could do it, if that works with people. Yeah. And in terms of, I think 4, 5 and 6, it would mean, Anthony, that
hang on.
You'd have to not
Don't spring that on me.
Well, it would leave 9 and 10 that do go well together.
Okay, yeah, no, we could do that, because words we can do, but yeah, we can do that. I'm okay with that. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll pop it on the website, and Anthony will put it all over LinkedIn, no doubt.
If I'm just thinking it's a small group, if you can't do it, Michelle, is it worth us looking at the week? Can you do the week after? Because, or are we going to get to that funny kind of? Let's say, can people do the week after better?
Oh, sorry, I didn't notice your comment there. Yeah, we can certainly do the week after the 17th.
Does that work with everybody?
Yeah.
And I know there are about another 5 people that will want to come, definitely. I think, like I said at the first one, it's nice to have a smaller group because we can all talk. I don't know, Ashley, you sort of ducked out and we were just giving people to have the opportunity to reflect on this session. You don't have to, but I didn't know if there's anything you wanted to raise or anything from what we've done today.
Yeah, no, I think I've just echoing everybody else's comments on there. So yeah, just thanks for the session and really good. And like you say, it's a piece of work that, you know, we kind of need more people involved in to kind of make that movement and change moving forward within education. So yeah, great work.
Well, thank you.
Well,
And you're happy enough with the kind of structure of how it works? Is that seems to be the right way for everybody? So
yeah.
Well, okay.
Brilliant.
Okay, well, we'll see you in whenever it
5
is.
weeks' time.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, smash.
Go and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you
both.
so much.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.